Time to get going. Another big class. So today I'll talk a little bit about technical considerations, how you actually incorporate that into the work that you're doing. And so you have your capstone project. It exists, it's mostly working. Something changes. All right, we're going to talk about constraints too. Something changes. You find that something doesn't work, or that the way that you're using it isn't going to stay in the free tier, or you found a customer who's actually willing to give you money for it, and you need to change something about it. So this is one of the things that distinguishes doing a cookie cutter project and doing a project that actually people use. Because especially you're in Bridge, so you decide you're going to build some really cool apps and show it to people, and it never fails, but someone says, oh my gosh, if only it did X, I would buy it. Doesn't matter what X is, right? There's always something. And I can tell you from personal experience that is very common in software. So the question I'm asking you today is, if someone came to you and said, if your capstone did something it doesn't do right now, what would you do? How would you revise it? How would you think about that? My guess is that a lot of the projects you've done in university have mostly been things that you did and you turned in and you were done. They weren't something that you had built and showed to somebody and they said, I like this, but can you change these things about it? And that changes the nature of what you're doing. What's going to break? What assumptions did you make? They're going to break when that constraint changes. How do you address that? You look at your own project and say, what would be really cool is if it did this. I hadn't really thought about that before. What would it do? How would you deal with that? What are the costs? And the costs here are not just economic costs. Don't think, it's going to cost me X number of dollars. Think, what am I giving up to do this? Are you familiar with the term opportunity cost? You're here in class. The opportunity cost is you're not home playing games, or doing something fun, or even just spending a little bit of time out in the sunshine working on that vitamin D deficiency that you probably have over the winter. So there are other costs than that. How many of you have ever thought about working in a startup company? I mean, that was the big dream in tech for a long time. What do you give up when you go into a startup company? What do startup companies expect you to do?
Want to give more time.
Right. The only thing that you have that they really want is productivity, and most of the time, all they can do is measure that by is time. You want to talk about the wrong metric. People who spend all of their time working are not necessarily the most effective. Having said that, I will also tell you that people in a real startup company who really are motivated to do that end up working an awful lot. 80 hours a week. I've been in that, I've done it. It's a lot of fun because from an intellectual perspective, you're doing something new and different and interesting. And I can look back at things that I did and said, wow, they're still pretty cool today. But there's an opportunity cost of that. It means you're not going to spend a lot of time with your friends and family. It means that you might even be earning a decent salary, but your opportunities to spend that are going to be a little more limited than you think they will be. I mean, how many of you did co-ops? In your co-op, was it basically like a 9 to 5 kind of job? Right. How many people at the company where you were working did you see people working more than 9 to 5? It depends on the company. Some companies have that much, very much as a culture. And the kinds of companies that tend to get co-ops tend to be more like that. Those are life choices that you'll have to think about. And I'm not saying that it matters in this specific instance. What I'm instead saying is that it's the broader sense of costs. What do you want to achieve? Why do people work so hard in startup companies? It's not just about money. How much money do you think you can make from a startup? I was working for someone in a startup company, and he was my boss. And the day the company went public, he made 110 million US dollars. And that was 32 years ago. 110 million US dollars 32 years ago was a lot more money than it is today. But even today, if $110 million fell in your lap, you'd probably be like, fuck this, I'm out of here. I'm going to go do something different. You know, I'm going to go surf, or I'm going to go swim, or I'm going to sit in the sun, or I'm going to travel, or I'm going to do something that's more exciting. So, when you think about your project, does it excite you? Is it the kind of thing that you say, this is so cool, I want to spend a lot of time on it because I'm really dedicated to it? And if you're not, that's fine. But that's what I'm talking about, the opportunity cost, the things that are intangible that I want you to also consider when you are trying to weigh how do these things change. Because changes aren't just to the code, changes are to the process, changes are to the things that you do and the values that you actually have. What motivates you to get up in the morning? But I'll bring it back to that now. Jurisdiction. This is a really good example of what can happen in a tech company, in a tech business. You know, you're a little scrappy startup company and somebody comes to you and says, you know, we're in Germany. Are you GDPR compliant? And you're like, say what? How many of you know what GDPR is? There you go. Every country has standards and requirements for handling personal information. That doesn't mean they're particularly good standards necessarily. Some countries have better than others. The GDPR is specific to the European Union. So if you want to sell products in the European Union that are interacting with people, you almost always end up getting entangled with the GDPR. But then the German company says, okay, great, that's wonderful. Once you add that, we'll look at your product again. And then your salespeople go out, and marketing people, and they're talking to somebody in Brazil. Turns out Brazil has different standards. They're not going to be the same standards. And now you have to start thinking about, how does this affect my project? How does it affect my product? What do I do with these things? Data residency. What do you do if all the data has to stay in Canada? This is always an interesting one to me because I have a very long-standing background in data security. I could build an information security system so that it doesn't matter where it's stored, no one's going to get it. I mean, so you keep all the data in Canada. Who has access to it? I mean, what are we protecting here? If a country requires you keep the data in their country, what are they trying to protect?
Sensitive data.
Sensitive data. And who does it not protect it against?
The government.
Sorry?
The government. Like that.
Bingo. Right. So how would you actually build a system? Maybe I'll use this as an example because I don't really like the studio today. How would you actually build a system so that no single government could actually get the data? That it would require collusion across governments. They'd actually have to act in concert. How much harder would that suddenly make it for anybody to get that data that you didn't want to have? Think about that. How would you do that? What do you think of that as an interesting constraint? Now, I would suggest to you, if you want to do that, don't make Canada and the US the two countries you're using, because they're the most likely to collude with each other. Even when they're on the outs, they're still basically integrated. What are you going to do if your cloud budget is cut by 50%? These kinds of things happen all the time. You know, you're in a startup company and they come to you, or you're in a regular company and they come to you and they go, well, sorry, we're going to cut around here. So it's half the cloud budget or you. Which one are you going to choose? It kind of depends, right? If you don't think you can do the job with half the cloud budget, tell them you'll work on it and find a job. And these kinds of situations happen routinely. Companies do these sorts of things because someone who's completely detached from whatever it is you're working on makes a decision that says, we need to cut costs. And they often don't really have any strong understanding of what the actual cost structures are. They're looking at, roll-up spreadsheets put together by accountants. There's nothing wrong with an accountant as long as you can shoot them. I'm just kidding. What happens when you scale up? You have 10 times the users. This is the Slashdot effect. I don't even know if Slashdot's around anymore, but the idea that you suddenly get an influencer who's talking about whatever it is you're building on TikTok, and the next day, well, within hours, what happens is your load goes way up. Last time I talked about serverless. One of the big advantages of having a serverless architecture is it actually permits you to handle that kind of rapid scale up at a price. Because there's always a price for the cloud. The cloud is not a charitable organization. No one who's building software in the cloud is running a charity. I think I might have asked this question before. Does anyone know what the average profit margin is on a software as a service business? Do you know what profit margin means? So for every dollar of revenue you bring in, you get to keep some percentage of it. It's about 70%. 70. That's kind of one of those numbers that you go, wow. So you get $1 million in, 700,000 of it is profit. How many of you watch YouTube videos where they're advertising VPN services? It's got to be the single most common service you can get. Is a VPN service. It's like, what does that tell you about the VPN business?
Very profitable.
Insanely profitable, and the cost to get one more customer is way below what they're paying for that ad, or it's way below what they're charging that customer. How many of you think you actually need a VPN? How many of you use a VPN? There you go. You're all potential customers. VPNs generally aren't very useful. And by the time you start using the ones that are useful, it's probably because you're a journalist in a country where they'll kill you if they find out what you're actually writing. No, I'm not joking on that one. How many of you use messaging apps? What's that? Wine? I had to pick something esoteric. Anybody ever heard of wine? It's Japanese. It's popular in parts of Asia. What else do you use? Telegram? Anybody use Telegram? A couple people. That's because they're in the poly market business. All that stuff, all those crypto pros are on Telegram. How many of you use Signal? Ever heard of it? Why would you use that? He says he's using it, so he's obviously doing something that he doesn't want people to know about. Why would you use it? You had a project for your class. A project with your friend. So your friend was using it, so you're going to use it. See, that's the best way to get people to use your product. Seriously. There's never a better way than word of mouth. Why is it that every one of the services you sign up for will give you, like $5 to sell out all your friends? Oh, give us their email addresses and we'll give you a $5 credit if they sign up. Talking about dark pattern labs, right? Okay, so the point here is that all of these things impact your software design process. You have to think about these things. Oh, and by the way, the reason to use Signal is because it's actually the most secure messaging app that we have right now. It is open source. It has a non-for-profit foundation that owns all of the rights to Signal, and it is literally structured in such a way that it's very difficult for any country to take it over. Why do you think the guys in the US government that weren't supposed to be using it were using it? They knew it was actually pretty secure. Not necessarily secure at the level I would be wanting to talk about active military events going on, but I'm not going to be involved in them, so it doesn't matter. Or suddenly you get a sensitivity increase where somebody has decided that your data is now classified as health information, and probably because somewhere along the line somebody figured this out and it either involves a regulatory authority or a lawsuit. How many of you have ever been in a lawsuit? Anybody have a lawyer or a parent? I think most lawyers don't work with.
I had some sort of payout from FTX, like cents.
Yeah. Oh, you got one of those dubious kinds of class action lawsuit settlements. Yeah, I have one that it was $7.81, and they sent it to me as an electronic gift card. Oddly enough, the only one I've ever been involved in that returned any kind of a reasonable amount of money was against UBC, of all places. And that one I got, it was $4,700. And that was because of personal information exposure. So that's a good example because it both demonstrates that it really happens and it explains how expensive it can be. Because for the organizations that are compromised, those are multiplied by tens or hundreds or thousands or millions of people. How many of you have ever had a data compromise? Well, he's obviously had one. How many of you have had your data compromised? You get one of those notifications that says, oh, we're sorry, but we leaked your data. Someone unexpectedly compromised our database. How many of you trust your database provider? That's a good constraint. That should be on there. What happens if you have to change database providers? How does that affect you? What happens if you have to change cloud providers? How does it change your project? All right, so when you take a constraint like this, you want to step back and you want to say, what breaks? Now, part of this is, it's a really good kind of question for me to ask you, is to say, I'm looking at your project. something changes. You have to move from your cloud provider to your other cloud provider, to the cloud provider. But what are you going to change? How are you going to change it? How does it affect you? That's actually a pretty good question. I'll have to keep that in mind. Can you point to me where your dependencies are? Because that indicates to me whether or not you've even thought about this, how well you know your own project. I mean, it's one thing to have, I guess it would be ChatGPT today because the new version of that just came out, and then Anthropic just sent an announcement that said that there's a new improvement for Claude today as well. I'm like, I can't keep track of this stuff. So take your favorite AI coding agent, buzz this thing up, and then I come along and I ask you a question like that, and if you can't ask your AI coding agent, how well will you be able to answer? That's an interesting question because that says, is this your product, your project, or is this the AI's? So, what would you change? Look at your project. Take one of those examples for your own project and say, hey, this could apply to mine. I'm going to take this and drive this down and see how it affects my project. What would I have to change to address it? What's the cost? Maybe it simplifies things. It's possible. Almost never happens, but it is possible. So you might have something that changes and suddenly you can actually simplify it. What are your claims? How do your claims get affected by that? Okay, well, if I added a GDPR requirement in there, then obviously I would be adding a claim that said that I was GDPR compliant. And then I can use that claim to drive the tests that I would need in order to verify that. And that's the way I think of this. I have a new requirement. How do I know I'm meeting that requirement? Well, I need some tests. This is now where you can actually use search tools and whatnot to say, okay, what are the requirements for GDPR? How do they apply to my project? Maybe your project doesn't have any personally identifiable information, in which case you can just simply say, oh yeah, we're already GDPR compliant. How do you make sure that you remain GDPR compliant? Because now your project is growing, your company's growing, you're not hands-on doing the software development anymore, someone else has joined the organization, other people have joined the organization. How do they know that there is this requirement or this constraint or this expectation? That's the reason you add a CCT. That's the reason you say, we claim to be GDPR compliant, here's how we know we are GDPR compliant, and if you come along and break it, then one or more of these tests should fail. And that's not guaranteed. In all fairness, you could add a completely new database and nobody's ever bothered to test the data in there. But when you add a new requirement, think about that and say, how am I going to make sure that I'm doing what I claim to do? I think the GDPR is a really good example, so let's build on that. So currently you're storing data in US East 1. Well, that no longer satisfies the EU's data residency requirement. Now here's an interesting question. US East 1 would suggest you're using AWS probably, because that's their naming convention. But I don't know, I haven't looked at the other naming conventions recently, it's probably similar. Let's suppose that you are on Azure. So I won't pick on AWS, I'll pick on Azure. You are on Azure, and you move that to the Irish data center. So now it's in the EU, so it satisfies that requirement. How much safer is the data there? Anybody know? Who do you think has access to it? The silence is actually very interesting. Nobody's even willing to hazard a guess. Clearly, European governments, certainly the Irish government, would have access to it if they wanted it. Can you think of any other governments that might be able to access it? All right, I'll leave that question for you to look at and to consider then. The EU actually requires the right to delete data. And it has to be something you can actually do. It can't be something like Google's YouTube takedown appeals process. Anybody ever posted a video to YouTube that was taken down?
Copyright strike. I'm not the take it down
Yeah, that was mine.
Did you look at the appeals process?
No, I didn't.
Right. Almost none of them are appealed. And of the ones that actually are appealed, almost none of them are actually overturned. My favorite, my absolute favorite, probably because I played World of Warcraft, is that someone actually sent an email to Blizzard support objecting to the suspension of their account. But there was just one small detail. What would make this story interesting?
It's not suspended.
Exactly. It wasn't suspended. Guess what the answer was? The answer was, we've reviewed our evidence and we are upholding suspension. And that is damning, because that tells you exactly what you get when you start talking about automating these kinds of customer service, and you create a scenario in which the very party that is responsible for enforcing it is the one who's responsible for deciding your appeal of their enforcement. Okay. In the EU, you have to provide consent tracking. In other words, if you're going to put cookies on the machine, you have to get permissions to do that. When they first came into effect, what a lot of websites did is they just simply blocked the EU. But that isn't very economically viable either, because it means that over time they have to reduce that. So what do? We move our data into an EU data center. We have to actually implement a mechanism for deleting things. Now, deleting doesn't sound very hard. How many of you have ever heard of Facebook? Turns out people put pictures on Facebook. You can actually delete the picture, except that it doesn't get deleted. Now, it could have changed, but the way that Facebook was doing this is, when you deleted a picture, they would put it on a list of pictures that have been deleted. And when someone would try to access it from the internet, they would block it. They'd say, no, sorry. But the picture wasn't gone. So it could still actually be disgorged, I think might be the right term I'm trying to think of. You could actually get it back through discovery. So like legal process. The authorities could gain access to it because it's still there. People figured out ways of getting around it initially, and I think Facebook has patched that. But why? Why didn't they just delete the picture? I mean, if the picture was on your laptop, which of course is now passé because you don't have the M5 laptop, right? If the picture is on your laptop, you just go and you just delete it. Is it gone? It's more gone than it would be if it were on Facebook. But in fact, what happens is the storage is not cleared. The stuff is still there. It's still accessible. And so if we can gain access to your physical device, we can retrieve it from it. Well, Facebook has this problem at scale, which is they don't keep pictures as individual files. they're increasing something much larger, and that something much larger gets backed up and gets replicated, and so deleting a picture doesn't mean the same thing in their context that it means when you're looking at that rule. And so that's why I make a big deal of this. It turns out that actually implementing deletion is not a single event, it's a cascade of events. You have to get rid of it from every backup copy. Oh, wow. Well, this does make it a lot harder. And you have to think about that. And of course, adding consent management isn't too bad. There's like standardized packages for much of that. So that's probably going to take you a couple of weeks of work, and suddenly all of your North American users are going to be taking a higher latency hit because now they've got the, let's see, it's about 120 millisecond latency from here to the EU. I know because I have an EU account in my game. If I'm on the eastern side of the continent, it's only about 60 milliseconds. So that literally is like the extra network delay. Right. So this is the thing today. I said I'm not sure that I really want to do it, but I'll ask. How many of you would like to do the taking a constraint of your choice and looking at your capstone project and walking through and trying to figure out what that constraint would do? See, I should have baked cookies. Then I could ask how many people wanted cookies, and I'd be getting some hands up finally. Well, there we go. That's 45 minutes of it. So let's see. What? I made a suggestion of something that would be good to explore. Now I don't even remember what it was. All right. How are the capstones coming? Anybody done? Because it's what, 3 weeks away now? I think that's about right, 3 weeks. I saw a couple of like panicked looks in the audience now, but oh shit. How many of you have at least an idea of the capstone at this point? Well, that's good. It looks like I see a few more heads bobbing there. What else to talk about? Need a good example of something on the fly. What I talk about. So let's see if we can come up with an idea for something we want to build. I'm going to do the dangerous thing of actually trying to do this live, which will no doubt kill me, but what the heck. We'll see where it actually shows up. Oh, good. Perfect. Now, see, this is always the fun part because I don't have another screen here, so how do I do this? I'll just do that, I think. Oh, right, I can just share this. Let's see, what happens? Where is it? Is that the one I brought up? That is actually the one I brought up. There we go. Of course, I can see it and you can't. So what I'm going to do then is change the screen. There's a magic key command that will make them the same, but let's do duplicate. Keep it. Now you can actually start to see things. There. See, this is actually how I write the slides. Probably can't see that either, can you? You can close the blinds, I suppose. This is actually how the slides I actually do in Markdown. But let me see. I wanted to do something new, so let's go. What is this way? That's right. Come on. So what shall we build today? Why do I not build that I need to build at some point? Yeah, that's... I'm going to do that, but I wanted to start off with something I don't quite have well defined yet, so... Any ideas? Anybody want me to build something? I'm just trying to think of what can I possibly build that would be interesting to watch here. And I had an idea earlier, and now I can't remember it. That's the worst part. So I was like, oh yeah, that's a really good idea, and then it's gone. No, I never run this command. I'm gonna make that a little bit smaller. There's no in between here. Okay. Because it's afternoon. So, start up with Claude. We'll see what it says. I don't usually do broad, open-ended questions like that. You can end up with weird behaviors, but let's see. Great question for the class to think about. Here's a few. Multi-service app with Docker Compose, a simple object storage tree. Oh, these sound like mode collapse. Oh. Those will be fun. So what I've just literally told it to do is to basically go wild and give me crazy ideas. 3 sample projects from the possible completion space with a probability of less than 0.01%. This is the Claude drunk mode, quite literally. It was only 20 seconds, so I've actually had it go away for like 5 minutes, 6 minutes before thinking things up. Container Battle Royale. Spin up 10 containers that each get a health bar and randomly attack each other over HTTP. A live dashboard shows eliminations in real time. The last container standing wins. Teaches health check, service discovery, resource limits, container lifecycle, but is a gladiator arena. See, isn't that a much more fun idea than building some bullshit example there? So this is the interesting thing I find about working with large language models and AI in general, is that they're basically trained to be really conservative. And so they're going to give you the conservative answer that your parents would approve of. But I'm a rebel, so I'm like, I don't want the stuff my parents would approve of. I want the stuff that's like way off the deep end. Like, you know, Claude after a weekend of binge drinking, which, I mean, Battle Royale is not bad. I like that one. It's a pretty good idea. And the reason I'm showing this is because I want you to understand, and then there was this conversation after class last time, and it's like, I know that some people don't like AI, and there's lots of different reasons to like or dislike it. And the decision to use it or not use it is entirely yours. But I want to show you how I use it so you can maybe see something that you didn't think about before. And that's kind of the essence of learning. A distributed Tamagotchi. I used Tamagotchis in the last class as an example. This is cool. How many of you know what a Tamagotchi is? Like my last class, I used Tamagotchi and didn't expect anybody to remember this thing because it was like
It's like a small toy.
Yeah, it was basically a fake pet. It was a little electronic thing that and it grew over time, and it was very popular for a while. It was like crazy. So a virtual pet whose organs are microservices, a hunger service, a mood service, and energy service. The class feeds it via API calls. If any container dies, the pet visibly suffers on a dashboard. Kill a container mid-demo and watch the class gasp. It teaches resilience, coupling, health monitoring, graceful degradation, but with emotional stakes. It's like, is this fun? It's kind of cool. Cloud telephone game, a chain of 8 containers. You whisper a message into the first one, and each container corrupts the message slightly and passes it to the next. The class, well, you don't even have to actually play telephone. Anybody ever do this exercise? Where you like start with a word at one end of the room, and then you whisper it to the next person, and by the time it gets to the other end of the room, it's like completely different. You know, you started with Hawaii and you ended up with rutabaga. Like, how did you get between these? That happens. It's actually pretty cool. Those are better. But, nah. Now we should get weird stuff. So here's the interesting part about the way that these work, is that in essence, when you ask them a question, what they do is they sample from the high probability end of the spectrum. But they have availability for everything in the spectrum. And so I like to do research. So when I'm looking at things and I'm asking you researchy questions, I'm going to get, I want crazy answers. I don't want this is what everybody's already tried. It's like, that's boring. There's no research opportunities there. There's no interesting opportunities there. Still working at it. Now, see, that I had to work twice as long that time. Zork in the clouds. Oh my gosh. Now, see, that's cool because I actually know that Zork was one of the very first text adventure games ever because it was built for a PDP-11. And they haven't made PDP-11s in almost 50 years, I think. Certainly more than 40. text adventure game where navigation happens via DNS queries. Dig north.dungeon.local returns a room description. Dig sword pickup local grabs an item. Each room is a container. Kill a container, that room collapses. It's very big on container technologies. Isn't that interesting? One container. Everything's in a container. Which one do we build? Keep the cloud plant alive. And that's kind of like a Tamagotchi for for plants. It's like, that's not very exciting. I mean, don't get me wrong. The ideas are usually kind of crazy. None of these are crazy enough. I mean, these are all way too sedate. I wanted something a little bit more interesting. Although, I might go back for Container Battle Royale, because that was actually pretty good. But now I'm stressing it a little more. Yeah, it's going to take about, oh, see, there it goes. Tokens coming. The passive-aggressive API. The classroom is the cloud. Each student opens a URL on their phone, a WebSocket mesh connects them all. You submit JavaScript functions to the cloud, and they get farmed out to random students' browsers for execution. Results aggregate on the projector. A student closes their tab, node lost, watch the work redistribute. You literally build a compute cloud out of the people in the room. That's actually not too bad. Kind of interesting. The passive-aggressive API. Build a REST API that starts friendly, but as you abuse it, no auth, hammering it with requests, malformed payloads, it gets progressively snarkier. Okay, I think this might be the winner. Polite 429s become sarcastic. Then it responds only in riddles. Then it goes to. Then it starts replying in Shakespearean insults. Teaches rate-limiting auth and API design through emotional deterioration. Sorry, but this is really good. See, this is what I like. I read something like that and it makes me laugh. It's like, anybody else? Oh my God, this is a dead audience today. I do need to input these. A raft election with human notes. Yeah, no, that's the. I like number 2. And so Claude Code has a what's called plan mode, where it actually goes into this whole systematic mechanism where it will, so it knows what it wants to build now because it suggested it. So which one do you want to choose? Do you want to choose Python, Node, or Go? Anybody have a preference? Going once, going twice, gone. It's Python. Good. Do we want a simple HTML page? I think I'll just go for the terminal. The more gradual descent into madness. I like that. I really do. This is great. Okay, so we're going for a Python Fast API, which will only work in the terminal, and it will use a dynamic continuous degradation of service until it's absolutely insane. So there you go. It says submit the answers, and Claude will actually just go off and build something. And what I find amazing now is that it's definitely gotten better since the beginning of this term, no less. It's building things that actually generally work. Now you notice I didn't quite vibe code that. I mean, Claude vibe code it. And I don't usually use it in this particular way, but I wanted to walk through some of these things. Dynamic SAS is going to be the most fun to watch. I don't know what they've done to Claude, but Claude actually has a really wicked sense of humor sometimes. I had dry sarcasm on it today, and I'm like, dry sarcasm is not easily done.
It does seem a bit overdone at times. Notice with Claude.
Sometimes. Well, on the other hand, Gemini annoys me because it's a subsequence. There you go. Plan is ready. And clear context and bypass permissions. We can do that. Let me build this. Fast API, Uvicorn. So Uvicorn is a web service that's in Python. Anybody use Uvicorn? Anybody know what a Fast API is? Think of it as like a REST API. It's just an interface that runs over the web. Does anybody know what a REST API is? Yeah, no, maybe. What is it?
It's just an API that does like CRUD operations.
It doesn't have to be CRUD operations. I mean, essentially anything you can do through the web is a web API. We use formal web APIs now because it's a convenient way of capturing and cataloging and describing what the service interface looks like. And from the web API, then we can generate the web server that processes the API calls automatically. You don't have to actually do that. I mean, in the old days, you had to actually sit down and write code to handle every single one of those logical extensions. And then we started hooking them into external managers that would handle it. And now it's built in. One of the reasons that I can't give any weight to code artifacts now is because of this. Because you can literally sit down with Claude and you can say, I'm thinking about building this, and it will walk you through and talk you through the options. And it will then go and build it. And it's not just Claude. It's also, everybody has at least Copilot through Google, or through GitHub. Most people seem to have access to others. I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of free student plans as well. Oh my gosh, you're using, oh, you're good, okay. It's using UV. I don't like pip. Pip is for old people. It's already 0.1 irritation from the 2 authenticated requests. This is great. Let me test the escalation. Spam it to increase irritation. This is awesome. And I, by the way, will actually make this repo available when it's done, because I want you to be able to actually look and see what I mean, I'm not building this. Obviously, Claude is building this. I mean, one of the other projects I'm working on, I did it almost exactly this. I said, this is what I need. I described that I needed to have an API entry point. I needed to have security, so it has to have an auth model, and what I needed the service to do, which was attestation. And it went off and it built it. I haven't tested it yet, but it does. It just builds these things. And what I'm finding increasingly is that it is capable of building systems that actually work at the end. So one of the projects I'm working on actually impacts Claude Code itself. So literally I have my Claude Code instance talking to a service that then talks to Anthropic. And that Claude Code instance is building extensions to the service. Why is that useful? Why is that important? I mean, this is kind of the equivalent of building your own computer and using your own computer to design your own computer. And I mean, it's an old tradition in the systems field, which is using your own operating system to build everything on top of it. Using your own tools, using your own compiler to compile the compiler. We don't do that anymore. It used to be that like the very first time you wrote a compiler, somebody had to manually hand code assembly for it. But once you have a compiler, you don't ever need to do that again. You just have the compiler compile the code. Test delete. Banana doesn't exist. Try weather, forecast, report, mood. That's not JSON. That's not even close to JSON. What is that? This is not like error codes like this to come back. That would be so funny just to watch a web server that did this. There you go. Okay, and we're done. I mean, it's a useful service, right? It's very much a useful service, but the point wasn't to show you that it could be a useful service. I did give you the opportunity to suggest something, and I would have been happy to build it. Artificial delays confirmed it slowed the spam test significantly. So rate limiting started to hit after 15 rapid requests. That's actually a really good example. So one of the things that can happen when you build a public API is that people will start hitting it. And one of the reasons they do that is because they're trying to break you. It is literally, anytime you hang anything out in the internet, it becomes a target. It is an adversarial playing field. CD, passive aggressive API, then activate, so that's easy, and then run unicorn, and then you can sit there and you can just start talking to it, because it's running on a web server. Cool. Actually, I should have CD'd, shouldn't I have? Let me add another one here so I can go look at this. Nope, that's the wrong place. I don't want to be there. I want it to be over here. That's where I want it to be. The passive-aggressive API. It's one file. That's it. .568 lines, one file. Maybe you should drink more water? Okay, these are good. I mean, I couldn't have generated this kind of code that quickly. I think this is kind of fun, but I'm a little crazy too, so. So what do I do next? Let's see here. Claude said, oops, I haven't set that up here. I'm going to reopen this. It binds state to the actual instance. So here, why don't I do that? That could be fun to show. New terminal. There we go. Okay. So now, to this Claude instance, because it's in a different, I started in a different directory, it actually doesn't have any context or any state. So the first time I started, it doesn't have any information about what's here. And so the normal thing for it to do is to pick up the project and start looking at it. This is fantastic. Patting itself on the back for work it didn't even know it did. A weather API that has feelings. This is pretty funny. You're right. I can't type. So it said, hey, you've got all this stuff in requirements, it's not in pipeproject.toml. And so I said, yeah, can you please clean it up? And so you can literally use it this way, and it will do these sorts of tasks for you. So this is one of those things that I keep saying, is that if you use it to, as a colleague, actually, I think that's the best way I would describe it, it will actually help you. It doesn't mean that it's the most competent. It doesn't know everything, and it doesn't know what you want. And it can't read your mind any better than anybody else can read your mind. I don't know about you, but half the time I don't even think I can read my own mind. There we go. Requirements.txt has been put out of its misery. That is great. So now I'm doing, standard kinds of housekeeping things. Instead of me sitting there going, don't put the cached Python files in Git, and me manually editing .git ignore, I just told it to do it. It will actually, not only will it pick up PyCache, it will also then put the other kinds of things that are in there that we don't need to keep. That is great. Let me look at something here. I don't know what keys I have. What keys do I have? GPG. List keys. If I can spell keys right. I wonder who Pyotr Kuczynski is. Oh, look at that. I've got my students to see. Oh, right, I have to here because I need to use it. All right, so let's see. How about... Great. GPG patch mode is picky. There you go. So this just did almost instantly the steps that we did at the very beginning of the class when we said, set up GPG signing. And it knows how to do it, so it can just do it for you. And you can find that these sorts of things make your work faster as you get used to asking it to do things so that you don't have to go look up documentation. Because I don't know about anybody else, but I barely remember that I can do --list -keys with GPG, let alone the 436 other options that it actually has. And it's not like it's the only tool that does that. One of the things I've definitely noticed about the GNU tools is that they literally have too many options. And I type --help and I get pages and pages of screenfuls of things, and there's so much that it's like I feel like I'm always wading through lots of documentation. But I can ask something like Claude, and that doesn't mean I don't want to learn those things, but often just by watching what Claude does, I'm like, oh, I didn't even know you could do that. And I've been working with these tools for a long time. Does anybody know the GNU tools? Anybody know what GNU is? Ever heard of open source software? The Free Software Foundation? I met Richard Stallman in 1988 at a dinner group in Berkeley, and I didn't know who he was. And I ended up having a conversation with him about intellectual property rights. And that's sort of like bumping into someone not knowing they're the Pope and having a conversation about religion. Because Richard Stallman was he basically is what set up a lot of what is the open source software movement today. And the GNU tools are what all Linux distributions actually use. So Linus had an operating system without utilities, and the GNU folks had been trying to build their own operating system for a decade at that point, pretty close to a decade, at least 7 or 8 years. And so that was a marriage for two of them. So there you go. Oh, it's just a public, yeah. There we go. So I now actually have, of course, you didn't actually put anything in there. So I can get it to write the README file as well. It's kind of boring watching these demos. I don't know how to make it more exciting. Probably have everything absolutely scripted so it's like a live action movie as opposed to the way it actually is when you're sitting there talking to these things back and forth for hours on end, and then at the end you realize that brainstorm. README doesn't need a formal design process. And this is actually what I like about the AI, is that I can make jokes and I can make obscure references to things, and they pretty much know everything that you've probably ever read. I did find a book that was not in the training set recently because somebody dragged me to a movie, and there was this book that the movie was based on, and I was like, oh, and I asked, I don't remember which one it was I asked, maybe it was Claude. Have you heard of this novel called Box Hill? And Claude hadn't heard of it. I'm like, wow, it's like 5 years old. It's not like a brand new novel. There's actually a book that's not in the training data. Don't worry, it'll get fixed in the next release. Leon McDuff Energy. Tables, there's highlights, the irritation mechanics, the boring but technical stuff. So here you go. This is actually literally an example of a small cloud app. No database. The API's emotional state lives in memory like trauma. So this is set up to use a GPG key with no signature requirement. I use this when I'm using AI coding agents. I give them GPG keys of their own, usually based on the project, and then I don't put a password on that. I only put passwords on my own, so that when my keys are signing it, I know that that is actually something I personally committed. That it ensures that I have that provenance data to guarantee that I am actually presenting what I did. There we go, initial commit. What's the new feature idea? When you're doing local work, it doesn't really matter which SQL database you use. If you use SQLite, it's typically in memory database. You can use that for like early prototyping. .pp is a nice one because it's basically just a local file. But you can do these kinds of things, prototype them locally. And that's basically what it was doing. It was running a local web server. And then just simply switch to a cloud-based database if that's what you need, because the interfaces are similar enough. And I know a lot of people said they were using Superbase, so here you go. What data should we persist? I see a few candidates. Weather reports, irritation history. Actually, there's this interesting tendency when we start building apps in the cloud to save everything. And it's not a bad thing to do initially, but what you're going to find is that over time, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the really interesting art isn't in saving everything. The really interesting art is in figuring out what you can forget and not lose very much. Your brain is really good at doing that, actually. The weird thing about the human brain is that it can absorb a huge amount of information, and part of what happens when you sleep is that it literally is sorting through it, replaying it, and essentially cataloging it, and throwing tons of it away. One of the things I was reading recently was that as people get older, they have a sense that time moves faster. And it ties in directly to the way that your human memory, the human memory system works, is that your brain doesn't remember everything you've ever done. What it does is it builds amalgams of similar experiences. So if you end up doing the same thing day after day, you get into a total routine, you won't even remember those things specifically because nothing interesting happened in your brain. So, I don't need to keep that. So it's a very lossy kind of compression. I don't know if you ever like walked someplace and then realized you don't remember walking there at all. I'm the only one who does that. You ever ride the bus someplace and you're like, oh wow, I don't where did the time go? What happened? I don't remember what occurred. It's that kind of a process where your brain just said there's nothing interesting here. Let's see. So, great teaching examples, right? So now we build about abstract base class. ABC is great. Are you going to use SQL Alchemy or Pydantic? So I can ask it questions like that, but notice that it's leading me. It's saying, do you want to do this? Because we've given it a high level objective. Yeah. Anytime you tell it that you like something, it's going to lean into it pretty heavily. So I try to actively not tell it what I want to do unless I really want it to just go do that. So let's see. This is literally why people are using these things. This is why I say I can't actually use the code that you generate anymore. The intellectual value that you put into these projects is about problem decomposition, because the thing that Claude can't do right now is that it can't look at big problems. It literally has a 200K token buffer. It's about a megabyte. You can store about a megabyte of stuff in its memory, in its working space. And when the problem can't be described in 1 megabyte worth of stuff, then it falls apart. And you would fall apart too if somebody came to you and they said, here's 50,000 books you have to have all memorized by tomorrow. You're like, I don't know what to do with that. What we are good at is breaking problems down into smaller pieces. Once it's down into a small enough chunk that you can use it with something like this, you can then have it build those pieces and have it put them together. Because you do it incrementally, because you're doing it in smaller chunks, you have the big picture in your head. That's why I'm focusing on design and architecture, not on implementation. Design and architecture fits in your head, but you can't remember all of the implementation. You can use an AI coding agent in order to build these pieces that help you realize that vision. And the really fun part about this is as you get better at it, you just get to a point where you're just like, holy moly, like in a day, I turned out a whole bunch of really interesting stuff. Now, of course, the code is crap. It's getting better. And it's getting better very fast. But the code is crap. And the challenge in getting better very fast is the same challenge. Has anybody ever lived through a pandemic? in the pandemic, I had to explain to people what it is about exponential growth that defies human intuition. And I came up with a very simple analogy, and I'm going to use it here. I used it earlier too. It worked pretty well. If I give you a pond, and I put one lily pad in the middle of the pond on day 1, and every day the lily pad splits. So you get 2, 4, so on and so forth. On day 48, the entire pond is covered. How much of the pond was covered on day 40? Yeah, it's actually a pretty simple little math thing, right?
2 to the 38 minus 2 to the...
It's 1 over 2 to the 8th. Does anybody know what 2 to the 8th is? 256. I know powers of 2. I can count perfectly that way. So 1/256th of the pond is covered on day 40, and 8 days later it's completely clogged with lily pads. That's the problem with exponential growth. That's the problem with actually watching this stuff and saying, this feels kind of like the pandemic. Like where it's like, I was working in the UK and like 6 weeks later everything was shut down. I flew back to Canada on the 17th of March, 2020. And that was the first day that you had to actually come back to Canada and self-isolate. So I self-isolated for 6 months. It was 2 weeks, but it felt like, I just went into home and just stayed there. Ate a lot of ice cream. We baked a lot of baked goods, a lot of cookies, and everything else. Okay, look at that. One is fun. And I know we're basically done. Well, we are done. So I'll wrap it up here. But the point is that I don't want you to overlook these things, but at the same time, I don't want you to think that they aren't going to open up different opportunities. That's the challenge. It's not going to be the opportunity that everybody thought was going to be opening up 5 years ago, because they're doing more and more and more coding, and the companies that are building them benefit most from building ever more powerful coding mechanisms. But at the same time, they're not building things that actually solve larger problems. They don't break problems down. They can't keep that in their heads. So if you use this, ever seen a calculator? When calculators first came out, they were like, oh no, you can't allow people to use that. They can't bring them into exams. They can't use them for tests. They can't bring them into schools. And now, you've got one on your phone. This is kind of the norm for tech. And there, it's off building it. I said, add a database to this thing, and now it's adding a database. I haven't done very much in trying to define or tell it what I want for tests. I have a rule that the AI instance that builds the code cannot be the AI instance that builds the tests. They violate it all the time. I call them on it, they apologize, and then they go get another AI to build the tests. And they they usually find bugs. And the first instance is like, oh wow, I didn't think it was going to work. Yeah, well, you can't write your own tests. You really can't. It's sort of what you have to do when you're working solo, but it's really hard to do otherwise. Okay, that's going to be it because I'm over time. And this is the first time I've gone over time here. But thanks everybody for sticking it out. And